Earthlings. I hope those opening titles played for you because they didn't for me. So we're having a bit of a glitch.
For me, always the Tars theme tune reminds me of 999 with Michael Burke. It's like it takes me back to my childhood. I think it was on like a Tuesday night, but it was on at like 9 o'clock. So I'd be allowed to watch the first sort of like dramatic tale, and then I'd have to go to bed. So that like when that theme starts, that's almost like I've got 15 minutes. It better be good. Because sometimes they give you like an intro and they'd be like, the man got electrocuted, this person got stuck in a cave. But the best one they'd save till last, and I'd miss that, obviously. I'd have to go to bed. I say the best one. I mean, we're talking about like some tragedy, but you know what I mean.
The best tragedy. Okay.
Yeah, the most exciting one.
Oh, no, not for me. Okay, so yeah, for some reason it's been glitchy. I don't know why, but
I saw them on my other screen, but
yeah, I was looking on this one, but it seemed okay. But I suppose it might. Don't know. We've had some technical issues. I had a power cut yesterday. I think they say power outage in Ireland instead of power cut, but anyway. And then you've had your internet down all day, as well. So yeah.
The joys of that. I mean, what that's the future potentially, though. How much reliance there is. Although saying that, I mean, it's quite interesting that you had a power cut and I had the no internet. And out of the two, I'd much rather have a power cut because I've kind of noticed that when you've got no internet, it's like I don't know, it's deceptive. At least when you've got a power cut, you have to accept that nothing works. But when you've got no internet and you can turn the lights on, but the TV doesn't work and your music doesn't work anymore, and you can't do this and you can't load this, yeah, it feels a bit more deceptive. At least if you've got no power, you just have to accept it.
Yeah, I did in the end, although my phone was still working, of course. But interesting. So
I'll say you depend on it, I suppose, doesn't it? Just shows how much our lives revolve around both the internet and power.
What? I've got to read a book now. So
in the dark.
Yeah, I see that horrible Andrew Tate has just come out saying books are for losers or something.
Yeah, that's because he can't read.
Yeah, probably is. Right. So let's get on with the main event. So we're calling this an animal rights show special, folks. And Andy will explain a little bit about why we're doing it in the end. But before that, Andy, I just wondered whether you could give us a quick rundown. And I fired some kind of words at you before, which was surge, XR, AR, and then NARM. So can you explain what all that means?
Yeah, so essentially, so NARM is the National Animal Rights March, which was last weekend, which Wendy's speech was from, obviously, to colour all these things in one. We did a stream which kind of, I don't know, allowed everyone who wasn't able to attend, which included myself, to do it. And sadly, Wendy's speech was the only real part of the day that we missed. So this is kind of the reason for this. But yeah, going back to the start, the National Animal Rights March, as far as I'm aware, started in 2016. Surge were the initial kind of hosters stroke organisers. And I think they did it for 4 or 5 years. XR did 1 year, and then Animal Rising, which they sort of took over the year after, or maybe 2 years afterwards. And that's how it started this year, that Animal Rising were planning on hosting it, although it was no longer called the Animal Rights March. It was a march for animals and nature, if I'm correct, something along those lines. So they've essentially changed the ethos of the march, and a few of us weren't very happy about that and kind of challenged them on a post, and it sort of transitioned into the fact that those few people then came together and started kind of putting on a counter march, I suppose, to try and maintain the original sort of ethics of the Animal Rights March, that the fact that this is what we're marching for, it's not about changing anything. I mean, the one thing, I think you mean to take the animals only view for once, and going down their mantra, it's the only day they've got and you want to make it about something else. That's kind of how our approach was, I suppose. At the very least, you've got to maintain that it's the Animal Rights March. And so we kind of decided to set up another one. I want to make it clear that it was never a rival march. The intention was never to try and push them over the edge or any of those things. They decided to step down of completely their own accord, and I think that's the best decision for everybody. But there was never a competition. if both marches had gone ahead on the same day, there'd have been no animosity or division between us. It was just the fact that we felt it was really important to maintain the animal rights aspect of the march, because as we well know, that gets forgotten everywhere else. And if the march,
Animal Rising didn't really want to do it anyway, and they
no,
said
they
yeah.
admitted that essentially they'd already asked some of the other big organisations, and none of them wanted to take it on, so they were reluctantly hosting it. So I think it actually worked for everybody in that sense. They didn't want to really host it. We were willing to take it on. They obviously had other projects that they'd rather spend their time and energy on, so it actually worked for everybody.
Yeah, and then tell us about you, because of circumstances, you decided to make it a global event.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I couldn't attend. So there was train strikes that were announced 2-3 weeks before the actual march, which didn't help. But they weren't actually the reason that I couldn't go. Mine was purely financial. But thinking about it, I was sat there thinking, well, instead of being really downbeaten about the fact that I can't attend and just sitting at home kind of miserable about it, why don't we see if we can stream as much as we possibly can of the march? Obviously, a lot of people will be going live, all that kind of thing. And it isn't just me that's missing out. There are everybody that doesn't live in England, for a start. Everybody else that can't attend, whether it's a train strike or financial reasons or because they've got other commitments or what. I mean, there were some people that were already doing other forms of outreach that didn't attend. There were other people that were potentially sabbing that couldn't attend. So there was lots of people that not only had the option to watch it live, but also the videos exist now forever. So they can go and watch that march today, tomorrow, next month, next year, 5 years. So that was kind of the thinking and the methodology behind it. It's not just me that's missing out. There's lots of people that are missing out. So why not?
And the reason we're doing this is because I think we streamed between us. I think we streamed about 4.5 hours, did we?
Something like that, yeah, roughly.
But the Wendy bit was missing.
Yeah.
Because just a kind of mix up of a kind of communication mix up. And then we had the panic about nobody seemed to have recorded it at all. And so then luckily somebody did.
Yeah, I think it took me 30 hours ish from the actual march happening until the first copy of that was, and I actually got the chance to watch it. Yeah. So it's a good job we didn't hang on, because we'd have been hanging on a little while. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, it's a good job they didn't kind of tape over it with Simpsons or something, but
yeah. Other than the Wendy march, I mean, because I rewatched our live stream. I think I watched it Sunday evening, and it's actually a pretty good coverage. I mean, there's obviously the couple of technical problems that we had, like playing your speech and that kind of thing, but in terms of the actual coverage and what you got to see and all that kind of stuff, pretty much everything is on there except the Wendy speech. So
yeah, we did get some very kind messages, didn't we? Because I think it's easy, especially in a place like Britain, which is relatively small. It is easy to forget that there are some pretty isolated vegans, dotted around the country, especially a massive place like North America. Yeah. And so it's easy for them to be kind of like hours away from each other and stuff. And so I think in that sense, we gave them a sense of community and stuff, which was
absolutely
the kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I reckon we ought to get on with it then. So the weird thing is Wendy's speech was the kind of keynote, or at least the final speech. And that was the one that wasn't streamed. So we were a bit devastated by it, and we thought, okay, we'll make things up by presenting it like this. Also, I think the speech goes on for about 17-18 minutes.
17.5 minutes or something.
And there's a good chance that we might have a special guest at the end, and you can ponder who that might be while you're watching this. So I'm going to put it on full screen, and that means that our ugly mugs are not on it, Andy, so we can go and make a tea or whatever. So we'll see you at the other end, people.
Enjoy.
Final speaker is Wendy McGovern. I'm guessing 1 or 2 people might have heard her name in the past. Wendy first got involved with grassroots animal rights at the age of 17 through anti-vivisection activism with uncaged campaigns. Since then, her activism has been diverse, including event organising, stall holding, outreach, protests and volunteering with local rescue and farmed animal sanctuaries. Her recent projects include setting up and hosting the Thrive Vegan World podcast, in which she discusses all things animal rights, liberation and veganism with guest activists and academics. Wendy is also the co-host of the Animal Rights Show, which streams regularly on YouTube and deals with themes and issues relevant to the animal movement. In 2021, Wendy hosted the Animal Rights March in London and is a regular speaker at animal rights events. Wendy has been living vegan for over 26 years, and she is here right now to give you a message. Please, Wendy McGovern.
Good afternoon, everyone. How you all doing? Thanks so much for the organisers of this. It's been a brilliant day. I hope you've all enjoyed it. And thank you to all of you for turning up. I wasn't sure with the strikes how many people would get here, but this is an amazing crowd. Alan was right. It's brilliant to look out at all of your faces. So, I get the short straw of following Mel Broughton. Thanks, Mel. So yeah, I've just got a few things to say. So the animal rights movement is different to other social justice movements. Other animals live under the tyranny of an oppressor and face an injustice on an unthinkable size and scale. But unlike other movements, the oppressed individuals are not the ones who mobilize their own movement. Instead, it falls to us humans to stand as their advocates, allies, and accomplices to seek justice on their behalf. That's not to say that our fellow animals are voiceless, or that they do not resist their oppression. They protest with their voices and resist with their bodies, but their protests are ignored and their resistance is quashed and often punished. Nor should we discount those who cannot or do not resist. For the systems they are born into are such that they have been force-bred, genetically manipulated, imprisoned, enslaved, and coerced, or displaced from their homes and cut off from the resources they need to thrive. Under a tyranny such as this, is it any wonder that for so many resistance seems futile or impossible? As allies to those born into bodies other than human, as Patrice Jones would say, the larger than human world, we need to dismantle the ideology of human supremacy and speciesism. And to do this, we have to be the change we want to see and recognize our own human privilege and the speciesist programming that we have been conditioned by our whole lives. To change the oppressive nature of our relationships with other animals, it's important that we practice humility, curiosity, and respect in all of those relationships. The number of other animals being oppressed is beyond what most of us can even imagine. But it is important to remember that each one of those is an individual as unique as you and me. Human supremacy denies the individuality of our fellow animals. Instead, they are seen as objects, as property, and as disposable commodities, here for us to use as we choose. We consume their bodies. We wear their skin. We use them as test subjects. We bring them into our homes in expectation of companionship. We coerce them to entertain us. We force them to work for us. And we perceive them as a mere backdrop to a world colonized, controlled, and dominated by humans. If human supremacy denies their individuality, as their allies, we should be mindful of not lumping all other animals together in one homogenized group. When we can, we need to center them as individuals, the individuals that they are, with their own needs and desires. individuals with emotional lives, with families and friends, individuals with agency, sensitivity and creativity, who help build communities, who influence their own cultures, and they shape the world that they share with us. We should also take care not to paint them only as weak, helpless, voiceless victims, because this misrepresents who they truly are. To uphold the false hierarchy of speciesism, humans deny that we belong in the category of animal at all, and so have created a false dichotomy of human and animal. So there are humans, and then there's everyone else. In doing this, we separate ourselves from the millions of other species we call animal. We place our own species as a pinnacle and see everyone else as inferior. This self-deception feeds our prejudices and allows us to discriminate against non-human animals. Our discrimination has become so normalized that oppressive practices are woven like threads into the tapestry of our cultures and societies. As animal advocates, we see the world differently to most other humans. And so we find ourselves constantly swimming against the tide. Our eyes and our hearts are open to the ubiquitous and continual oppression and injustice and the unspeakable atrocities perpetrated on our fellow animals every second of every day. Not only must we live with that, but as activists, we are choosing to speak out against what is seen as normal by most. Our path is not an easy one. It can be physically and emotionally exhausting. We can feel angry, frustrated, sad, full of sorrow and grief, and many of us are traumatized by what we see and hear, and also by the things that are hidden away from view. If ignorance is bliss, then knowledge can be excruciating. But these are normal emotions in reaction to the terrible plight of our fellow animals. Some emotions, like the anger triggered by injustice, are drivers of action. They tell us that we need to act, just like thirst tells us we need to drink, and hunger tells us that we need to eat. Our anger tells us this oppression is wrong. So rather than trying to get rid of our emotions or shut them down, which can be in itself detrimental to our health, we can use these emotions to motivate us and channel them into our activism. As the human animals who make up the animal rights movement, it is important that we practice our own self-care. And self-care is not just an individual practice, but it happens in groups and communities because we are animals wired for connection with others as a basic primal need to survive and thrive. We need to take care of ourselves and seek support from each other. And that's why events like this are extremely important for our resilience as activists, that we come together as a community of like-minded people with a common goal, in solidarity and support for each other. I'd just like to acknowledge each and every one of you for having the courage to take the hard path. It is undoubtedly the right path. This movement is full of passionate, motivated, dedicated activists. Please look around you and see that you are not alone in this fight. Today is also an opportunity to be loud and clear about our dissent of the status quo of human supremacy, to be seen, heard and felt on the streets of London and beyond. It's a chance for us as allies to show our solidarity to the individuals we stand with and seek justice for. There is no one magic bullet that will bring animal liberation. Our quest for justice will need a multi-pronged attack, and each of us will have our weapons of choice, things we are good at, aligned with and drawn to. But there's one important and powerful tool that we all use in our activism. On our placards at protests, on our posters and flyers, in outreach conversations with the public, in media releases, in written articles, in interviews, school talks, university lectures, social media posts and threads, even our daily conversations with friends, family and colleagues. And that tool is our language. Words are powerful and carry meaning beyond the words themselves. Indeed, words not only describe the world, they also shape it. And for a social movement, language is fundamental to expressing the core values and the claims of the movement. In her brilliant book, Animal Equality, Joan Danae says, "The way we speak about other animals is inseparable from the way we treat them." Recently, I gave a speech called Beyond Speciesism, Language and Liberation. And so I'd like to conclude with a section from that speech. Humans downplay the individuality, sensitivity and creativity and the emotional lives of other animals and the violations perpetrated against them through our language, through our euphemisms, our metaphors, our stories and even our humour. Our words reflect and perpetuate human supremacy and speciesism and strengthen our oppressive practices. The verbal deception and trickery we use in our language denigrates and discounts other animals. And in doing all of this, we sanitize enslavement, we normalize sexual assault and manipulated breeding, and we legitimize murder and genocide. Conventional language classifies other animals with inanimate things. We call them something, not someone. Person and people are standardly used only for humans. And this helps to maintain emotional distance and feelings of superiority. Other animals are referred to as it, reinforcing their inferior status as objects and commodities, and should always be avoided, even when deemed grammatically correct. As animal advocates, we need to be aware of not playing into the hands of the oppressor, and there is a way we may be inadvertently doing just that. And that is by perpetuating the paradigm of so-called welfarism through our language. I'm not talking about the well-being of other animals. As advocates for animal rights, we know the importance of respecting the inherent worth of each and every individual, and the importance of helping them thrive in the world. The well-being of individuals alive today is of paramount importance and shouldn't be sacrificed on the altar of ideals, and to better the lives of those not yet born. I'm speaking about the so-called welfare reforms for other animals with their continued use for our own gain. Some of this language is obvious: the humane slaughter, the better treatment and conditions, the grass-fed, organic, free-range nonsense that we hear so much of. Yet some language is not so obvious. Terms like love, cruelty, abuse, and treatment do not effectively convey the abolitionist goals of the animal rights movement. We have to remember that the current language use reflects the current norms of a speciesist world. The language of welfarism is spoken under the understanding of these norms. Speciesism not only happily coexists with welfarism, but is also bolstered by it. The language of welfarism allows those complicit with unjust practices to absolve themselves of any guilt or shame. Speciesists consider themselves animal lovers. Speciesists are against cruelty to other animals. Speciesists are horrified by the abuse of other animals. And speciesists care how other animals are treated. And yet, speciesists still support animal use. Of course, we want to eradicate cruelty and abuse and see more love and less suffering in the world. However, Those terms are subjective. What animal advocates see as cruel, many do not. And even when they do, most see some cruelty as necessary. Necessary if it means curing a human disease, having a warm coat, and to keep consuming others' bodies and secretions. And if they see it as necessary, they do not see it as abuse. So-called farmers claim they can love cows whilst commodifying their bodies and stealing and murdering their babies. People might love the dog they live with and yet think nothing of wearing another dog's skin. We don't have to love someone to respect their inherent rights to freedom and autonomy. This subjective language provides an invisibility cloak for speciesism, helping to hide it away in plain sight. This language oils the machinery of the systems of oppression of other animals. We need to disrupt those systems by using radical language that corrodes the machinery, language that breaks the trance of those hypnotized by speciesism. And so, as abolitionists, we need to be clear with our message to cut through the confusion. To effect radical change, we need to be radical in our words and our actions. Let's use our language as a political tool for change. All forms of activism can benefit from strategic language. We want to stop rights violations. We want to fight oppression. We want to end sexual assault, manipulated breeding and murder. We want to abolish all use of other animals, regardless of whether they are loved or not. Advocates and activists, this is a call to action. Through our activism, including our language, let's disrupt the norms of human supremacy and break the trance of speciesism. We must oppose the sanitation of sexual assault and manipulated breeding. We must resist the normalization of enslavement and defy the legitimization of murder and genocide. Let's corrode the machinery and unpick the threads of oppression. Let's show the truth and shatter the lies of the oppressor. And instead, let us make a demand for respect and take a stand for justice. Let us strive for equality for all our fellow animals, regardless of the bodies they are born into. Tom Reagan said, "We don't want bigger cages, we want empty cages." I'd go further than that. I'd say we don't just want the cages emptied, we want the cages demolished. So let's stand in solidarity as allies to the other animals to say, we are here, we see you, we will not be silenced, and we will never stop fighting for your freedom. Thank you so much for listening. What do we want? Where do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? Louder, what do we want? When do we want it? Have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Well, I think everyone is suitably impressed. Let me just put up a couple of messages that we've got. Well, that was I see what you mean about the old
The sirens, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we're listening to that because obviously I had to listen to it 2 or 3 times with my headphones on when I was enhancing it, and I was thinking, this is extremely loud for me. But the person recording, Wendy, is obviously like 15 feet in front of her. The people stood behind her must have been deafened because that's live for them. I'm only hearing a recording. That was literally like right behind them. Yeah, I mean, the fact that she managed to talk over that, brilliant. Because I mean, that was a pretty big distraction, you know, for a good number of time, and it came back about 3 times, and you know that's she was as sort of comfortable and as confident as anyone needed to be, and you could see that at the very end.
Yeah, so we did announce at the beginning that we would have a special guest, and so there's been a little bit of debate about what it would be, either Wendy or Ronnie's bum.
Yeah.
And so
is that what we've come to? Those are the two possibilities.
Yeah, that's two possibilities. Yeah, and Jennifer says, "Don't get me going." She's got a thing about yeah, and then maybe both. No, I don't think we're going to do that. So I think we should put everyone out of our misery and suggest that of course it's Wendy.
I hope I'm not disappointing anyone. I'm sure a lot of people were hoping it might be Ronnie's bum. I'm happy to share billing with Ronnie's bum any time if you're watching, Ronnie.
Okay.
Good evening. Good evening.
We can make a meme of that. I'm happy to share billing with Ronnie's bum anytime. Okay. Yes. Oh, what a surprise! It is indeed.
What a surprise,
Wendy. Hey, Wendy, that was a brilliant speech. And so, are you happy with the way it went?
Yes, I think I was at first, and then you know what it's like afterwards. You watch it back and think, "Oh, wish I'd said that different," or "Wish I'd done this." It's hard, and it's such a difficult environment. As you were just saying, Andy, it's so loud. It's really loud, and my focus was just on being heard because when I was listening to the other speakers, a lot of the time they were drowned out by the sirens and the crowd and stuff like that. And so I just thought, right, I just need to really try and be heard, really. So that was my focus. So it's really hard to give a good delivery. You're just literally thinking, oh, can they hear me? So, but yeah, I noticed
you forgot to promote your Patreon and ask for donations.
I did, didn't I?
Well, she also didn't ask us for a fee either, which she missed a trick there, obviously.
Oh, yeah, Andy, I'm waiting for the check. Come on.
Too late now.
or a Lear jet, maybe next year. So
yeah, next year. I'm gonna have a whole rider as well of like things that I want to have, like just on the day.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know what that is, and you know, I don't know what the sort of plans are for next year, our speakers. But if it's the same sort of idea again, i.e., everyone kind of gets to pick someone. Hi, how are you fixed for the
Andy.
Because it's like, I mean, what I'd want to ask you is, obviously, not so much when you were doing your speech, because most people would have been sat down, so I don't imagine a lot of them were doing this, but when you were walking to Parliament Square in amongst that crowd, you must have been thinking, how is this going to go down? Because everyone's kind of carrying and chanting exactly what I'm going to go and talk about. But it was great to see their reaction. I mean, the first time when you went, you know, they're not it. When you got the round of applause then, and then again before the end, it's like, if you all understand this, would you not be looking at some of your own things on your way home and thinking, I'm not going to take that again? I'd like to think so. Yeah. Because they definitely seemed to be with you the whole way through. Like they were understanding what you were saying to the point that it got a round of applause of agreement. So like, I'd like to see some reflection on that. And that's not a criticism, by the way. It's growth. There's nothing wrong with looking at something and thinking, I'm going to do this differently from now on because I've learned some new information or whatever. It's not a negative thing. It's a positive thing to look at something and say, I'm going to do this better than how I was doing it before or more effectively. It's never a negative thing, even if you think that it's criticism. It's not. It's a stronger message at the end of the day. And as you pointedly said, we communicate all the time, not just necessarily speaking vocally, but when we type on Facebook, when we write something with the T-shirts that we wear, all of this kind of stuff. And the stronger your message is, the stronger the message that other people are listening to and reading and receiving. The weaker your message, then the harder your job's going to be going forward. It's really simple stuff when you look at it like that.
Yeah.
I mean, look, the example I sometimes explain to people at outreach and things like that is, you know, when you were a kid and you went near the fire or something, your mum didn't go, well, I would be a little bit careful because you might get hot. They go, whoa, no. You get taught. Language is really important. This is urgent. We don't touch hot. Don't worry about it. You might get a little bit burnt. No one does this, and this is exactly what we're doing when we're talking about advocacy for the animals. We're kind of like we're doing the same thing. We're not talking about the urgency of the situation, which it absolutely needs. So yeah, I think it's a speech that everybody should hear. If you haven't, go and listen to it again. If you thought like you missed something, listen to it again. That's about the 6th or 7th time that I've listened to it now, and I think I hear something else every single time. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's worth separating that language section out at the end. I think that'll be great to have the standalone thing. So I think we'll certainly do that. Now,
well, that's just to say about that language section. That's actually part of my previous speech at the memorial event I think it was last month. So
that also needs to be out.
I've got that. No. I know. I said to Roger and Andy, like, is it cheating?
So
but yeah, most people haven't heard that. So that's what I thought. Like, not as many people would have heard that. And I asked you to as well, didn't I? Is it cheating? And you both said no, get it out there. So, but I've actually got, because Ronnie, funnily speaking, Ronnie's mum, Ronnie actually recorded it for me. He was there, and I've got it on my phone. So I have actually got a recording of that speech. So it obviously is slightly different at the start. So I have got that whole speech as well. If anyone is interested, we could put that out there.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, no.
You can do a watch along, Andy, and criticise it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important.
No, it's because when I put that speech together, actually, it might just seem like it was thrown together. But I'm really glad that you've just said that you get something different each time, because
absolutely, yeah.
I kind of had 3 main themes in there. The first theme was talking about other animals and their plight. The second was the human situation as activists and the self-care and all of that, and our situation. And then the third was the language. So it was 3 themes that I wanted to kind of draw together. So I don't know if that came across, but
yeah, absolutely. And it all came together really, really well. Like, considering, I mean, your speech obviously was quite considerably longer than the other people. But it didn't feel like that. That doesn't feel like 17 minutes. That sort of whizzes by, because it's all just flows really, really well. And it's so important and so kind of like informative in such a short space of time. Yeah, I think it was a tragedy that we didn't get to stream it, because obviously it was the only thing from that day that was really missing. But at the same time, we wouldn't have had this show, I suppose, if we had. So
yeah, that's true. I was just thinking that as well. It's really nice, and thank you so much for just putting this out there in on its own, platforming it on its own. So I really appreciate that.
It really is needed. I mean, one of the things, I don't know if you saw Naam's post, but they were like, what were the good things and the bad things about the march? I mean, I'm not going to moan about this, because it's something that I realised a long time ago. But looking at the placards, listening to the chants, looking at the kind of thing that was going around, we have to accept that we're already in this movement that's welfare is sort of based, and it's a case of how we're going to move away from that. And speeches like yours that make people think, and subtle changes to their language, are all it really takes to move away from that. Because I genuinely, more people that I speak to, the more that I interact with stuff, and the more that I see stuff like that, these people don't want to be welfarists, and they're not welfarists. No. They've just been essentially conditioned to use welfarist language, because a lot of the people that have taught them what veganism means use welfarist language, and they're just repeating it. But if you actually have a conversation with them and say, do you want this better treatment? They go, no, I want the end of this. And you're like, exactly. So it is just a language question for a lot of people. They're not saying, no, I think welfare is the way forward. They're abolitionists that are just using confused language. Yeah, I do think that's a problem.
Yeah, because that's the movement that people enter, isn't it? They enter the movement, and we're just so heavily influenced by our environment. That's the environment we're in, and so we replicate the language, we replicate the actions and stuff.
It's to do with socialization. Obviously, we're socialized as speciesists in the first place, like everybody is. And then when you come into the animal welfare movement, you'll get a specialist socialization from that as well. And so I've always said, if I'm critical of some of the, say, more modern influencers, it's kind of not their fault that they're using welfare language, because they came into a movement which was saturated with welfare language. What were they supposed to do? So there is that. Now, I've got a bit of I didn't tell either of you about this, but I've got a language thing that I'd like to discuss with you, if I may. And this is it here. Now, I had a bad night because Ruja had a bad night. Ruja, the rescued cat, and so she was running around, crashing into things and everything. So woke me up several times, and so this thought, this hypothesis, came to me around about 3:30 in the morning. So we're going to see if it's got any kind of wings, if you like. So this is Tarion Partridge's op-ed that they did for Derbyshire paper. Now, what was interesting to me was the language that was used, because they say right at the beginning, ever since I can remember, I've been an animal lover. So that's the kind of opening kind of gambit of it, if you like. And then it goes into what we all understand when you hear that phrase, especially from, people who are or who were, as it were, or members of the public say. It means that when they say that, or I'm against animal abuse, they're talking about cats and dogs. And that's what they say here. I adored my dog. I
think that part's really key as well. My dog, not dogs. I mean, let's look at the bigger picture here. If you go and buy a puppy from a breeder, you don't love dogs because you're perpetuating the dog rescue organizations that can't cope with the demand of dogs that people don't want to rescue. So you don't love dogs. You love the dog that you've gone and brought because you view them as property that's going to serve you in some way going forward, whether that's company, whether that's service, whether that's whatever. So they don't even necessarily love dogs plural. They just love their own property.
And they might love them, but they don't respect them. That I'd say as well.
Yeah. It's about, that dog started being nothing but vet bills and nothing but hassle. I mean, look at the amount of people that go, the dog won't stop barking, we can't have them anymore. Well, what about all the other things? Oh, forget that. The barking's the problem. So yeah, absolutely. If they don't serve a benefit, they're gone. Even love doesn't actually stop that from happening, does it?
Well, I'll tell you what, as soon as Ruja starts barking, she's out. Now, and so then he's got this bit here, right? Now, the point here is that in the vegan community, you say you can't be an animal lover and eat them. You can't be an animal lover and harm them. And of course, I mean, this is a vegan activist saying that you can, and she was, right? And so, this was kind of quite an interesting thing in the sense that you need more. You need to connect a few dots before you get to this thing where being an animal lover and eating them, culturally, that's okay. You then need something else to happen, some vegan education, for example, or just some introspection or reflexivity to start thinking, well, is that a bit weird? And this is where that comes in. What kind of they start thinking, what kind of animal lover eats the bodies of animals? So this is the process that's going. So you've got an animal lover eating the bodies of other animals, but that's not a problem. Culturally, that's just accepted, because when you say animal lover, you're talking about a different species. And then the interesting thing then is that they went vegetarian first, and then they went vegan. And then the language here is interesting because it talks about the exploitation, slaughter of other animals. Then there's a lot of stuff about respect in this article. So it doesn't go back to loving other animals. It doesn't make this thing. It doesn't make this thing about animal lovers cannot eat other animals, because clearly they can, right? And I just wonder whether. So this is the hypothesis now. I just wonder whether what we've got is a situation where, because we don't have any language which is outside of the welfare paradigm as our main language in the movement, it's the fact that they then start to say, well, kind of, what am I then? Am I they don't move to I'm an animal respecter. So they still have to kind of like try to explain themselves in terms of loving them. Does that kind of make sense to anybody? Because
I can understand what you're saying. I think that article, in fairness, is a great example of what we were just talking about, of someone that's gets it, but is still confused with the language that they're using, because she's using love in one sentence and then injustice in another, as though those two things are opposites.
No, but that's not what she did, though. The only time she mentions the word love, right at the beginning, that's what
I mean. That's what I'm saying. You can see her evolution of thinking.
Yeah.
But yet the language is still there, because that's the movement that we're in. How can you get away from it?
I feel like, in a way, we're trained in our socialization to love in a certain way. So we love certain animals in a certain way. So we love our so-called pets in a certain way, and this is what love means in our society, in our culture.
That's a really key point. You think the problem is what love means?
But then what I think activists then do is we try to shift speciesists and non-vegans into our new version of love, because we might discover, we have a new way of loving, which includes respect.
Yeah.
But then we then try to shift non-vegans over to our new way of loving, whereas non-vegans still love in the way they've been trained and we were trained. So we're trying to we're just framing it wrong, I suppose. We're using the old language and trying to bring everyone across with us, but we can't do that with the same language, I suppose. That's the thing. We have to start going.
Pretty much exactly what I think too. Yeah.
We need new language.
I'd agree strongly with that. And I think we do that with the word like cruelty, and I think we do that with the word like abuse in particular, that we've got a vegan definition of those words. And we're trying to say to people, if you don't agree with my definition, you're an animal abuser, something like this, right? Whereas really, if you've got a conversation on the street, which is going, based on something like, what do you think about animal abuse? Everybody's going to say, I'm against it. Well, what do you mean by that? Everybody's going to say, they're going to start talking about horses, cats and dogs, rabbits, etc. Right. Then if you then switch to slaughterhouses, that's when it completely throws them. Right. Now, it seems to me at that point is where the real education starts, because you can say, well, isn't it interesting that, you've kind of been tripped up by the fact that, we've done this switch and now it's kind of confusing for you. So let's talk about animal use. Now, far too often at that point, the activist starts calling the person an animal abuser and completely loses them. All the education just goes out of the window, and you're just not doing it. I think that is actually quite popular in the vegan movement, but I think the educational content is really so minimal. It doesn't almost exist, because you've kind of thrown them and then not discussed that with them. And that bit of it is the educational part. Isn't it interesting that as soon as we start talking about slaughterhouses, you don't know what I'm saying suddenly, whereas we were completely on track with each other when we were talking about cats and dogs and all that. That's where the education is.
Because we've been trained that's okay, that's acceptable to do that, isn't it? And actually, as Josh says there, what does love even mean, especially as there are different kinds of love? It's such a subjective term. We might all experience love in very different ways. And as I said in the speech, cruelty is very subjective. So what some people think is cruel, others don't. So we're talking with a very subjective language, which is why I think we ought to try to use less subjective language that's much more that we can all agree on, that most of us could agree on, like respect, like justice, like oppression.
Yeah, in other words, our language, and not try to kind of argue the point with their language. Because it's too confusing. People know what cruelty means. They've been brought up opposing cruelty all their lives. They know what animal abuse is, because they're against it and they've been against it all their lives, right? But that doesn't mean culturally you can't use them. So that's our in when we start to switch it to, well, let's talk about animal use, because they'll argue all day they're not an animal abuser, but they can't argue that they're not an animal user. So that's where the education starts to me. And when I look around the internet, I see that bit just falls apart then, because I think the vegan activists often want just to kind of go on the attack then, and start calling people names, and I think that's a mistake. I think it's a big kind of mistake. I think it's another thing we've done, and this goes back to what you said, I think in the speech, Wendy, is I think vegans have created a direct line between the word cruelty and vegan. They think that anti-cruelty means vegan, right? Which is why, and we discussed it before, why there's a lot of kind of confusion about the RSPCA, for example, because I've had vegans saying, well, they've got cruelty in their name, so therefore it's a vegan organization. You go, no, it's not. It never was, and all that. They're confused because in the modern vegan setting, the word cruelty is the dominant word we use. It's the main word we use over and over and over again. Sometimes it's the only word we use. It's not as though we blend it with exploitation and oppression and persecution like say, the earlier vegans would have done. We just keep pressing this cruelty button because for us in the modern world, there's a direct link between cruelty and veganism. And of course, culturally, that's not true. It just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And as Jeremy, hi Jeremy the Ape, as Jeremy says in his comment there, indeed, and love language doesn't necessarily mean ending their breeding, pet ownership, etc. Love for dogs, cats, and others does not necessarily oppose their use either. And I know so many people, as I'm sure we all do, who have such strong fondness, call it love, for their so-called pets, companion animals, whatever they want to call them. But we know that we would end the breeding of those other animals. We wouldn't perpetuate that whole kind of industry. We would want an end to them being used for our own gain as companions or in whatever other way. But they would strongly identify as animal lovers, and yet they're not vegan. They're not against use in other ways. And so, yeah, the love thing does not really. People just don't take that on board, because as soon as you say, well, you can't love animals, it's impossible for you to love animals and use them, they would completely be, they just would not agree with that. They would just say, I really love, and you can see the fondness they have and the sacrifices they make.
It's culturally incoherent. It
doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So
actually, this is just like a traditional animal rights show, Wendy, with you start reading out a quote, and I'm going to look.
Oh yeah, do you remember when I used to have a little bit of power at one point because I could find them? Do you remember that, Roger? Yeah. And then that ended, didn't it? I could highlight I used to highlight one, and then you'd unhighlight it, and I'd go, "Did you just unhighlight the?"
Yes, we were a bit of a battle of wills there, but I couldn't wait to take that power off you. But what about this, people?
You couldn't.
This is probably true, isn't it? That the word cruelty in the, Andy's talked about this. I mean, you're interested in the order of the words used in the definition and the fact that people will deliberately get it wrong, Andy.
Yeah.
Because exploitation and cruelty.
Even when they're reading it, not just off memory, even when they're reading it out, they switch those two words around, because in their mind, cruelty is the predominant problem. That's what they think is the fundamental wrong, cruelty, and exploitation is secondary. And that makes no sense. Yeah,
well, to me, I'm a long-term vegan, and so is Wendy. Old timers, aren't we, Wendy?
Yes.
Remember you used to say, watch it, Yates.
Watch it, Yatesy. I'll say it again, just for old time's sake.
But I never thought that the dominant word in the vegan movement would become cruelty, like the RSPCA word. Never thought it.
Look at it from this way, and this is going to sound really pessimistic. But if you were the animal use org collectively, and you wanted to completely reduce the effectiveness of our movement, you'd be looking at it thinking, keep talking about abuse and cruelty, because you're tiptoeing, and we're going to keep moving further and further and further away from you. You'd be encouraging this language because it benefits you, doesn't benefit the victims. So that's how I keep looking at this. If you were the people that we're trying to stop, they're not looking at us as a threat. They're looking at us and thinking, keep wasting your time.
Yeah.
And we could really take that on board.
And that's a good point about organised. I like, what did you say? The animal use org.
Yeah.
I love that. Collective.
Yeah.
But even organisations like the RSPCA, and we have to remember that the animal rights movement actually and the rights part of the animal rights movement. It's shocking that we have to say that, but it actually evolved out of you know, in can't even think of my words today, but out of like a dissent to the RSPCA and others, who the animal welfare, basically the animal rights evolved in contrast to that, you know, as a separate branch saying, no, we don't want welfare, we want rights. And yet we tend to use the same language. If you look at, you know, the websites of these organizations, they use the same language. And I think that's another reason why we should be really careful not to mimic that language, because we're talking the same language as the welfareists, who are quite happily endorse the use of other animals and stamp their labels all over the packaging of dead flesh in the supermarkets, you know, and still be for the use, but using the same anti-cruelty and humane and all of this language. I think, yeah, we really need to be careful to separate.
A mainstream vegan talk, and then you know, somebody brand new to it who is just kind of opening up to this idea, and then they Google animal cruelty. What are they going to get? Right. I mean,
well, they'll get the RSPCA if they're in the UK. That'll be the first, probably the search term that comes up for animal cruelty. It'll be the RSPCA's website.
I'm going to try it. Let's try it.
I would guess so. I would imagine that they've probably got that kind of. It'll be like report an act of animal cruelty, their line or something like that. I would guess animal cruelty.
RSPCA top.
Yeah, report cruelty to us. Report.
Yeah, what a great example.
Yeah,
but no, I mean, let's just say you had the RSPCA banner in front of you that said, I don't know, we're against animal cruelty. And you had a vegan and a non-vegan, both stood next to each other looking. They are looking at completely different banners. Those words mean completely. The vegan's looking at it thinking, how dare the RSPCA say that? Whereas the non-vegan's looking at that thinking, yeah, you're doing a really good job. This is what we're talking about. We're polar opposites, and it's exactly the same wording. But it's our mindsets that have changed, and we can't understand that theirs haven't. But that's the problem. Like that's what we're trying to educate. We can't just say a word and expect them to understand. They don't understand, just like we didn't understand. Mm-hmm. That's the problem, and we've got to.
Well, what about the argument then? I'll come back to Jeremy's point, but what about the argument that has been put to me is that our job as vegan activists is to change the definition of words like cruelty and abuse to make it fit what vegans think those words mean.
Why would we make our job really hard when we have words like oppression, exploitation, and use? That's
my response.
Yeah. You know, so we've got to change the entire English-speaking world's thinking about interpretations of words rather than just trying to tell them about words that we have that already. No, I think it's easier to just use the right words, really. That makes. Why bother picking cruelty? Why don't we make the word, I don't know, orange the word that we're going to do? It's exactly the same amount of effort we're going to have to put in to change the whole world's thinking. It just for me, that just seems ridiculous. When we've got words that do this already and we avoid using them, and a lot of people will go, because they're a bit too, I don't know, controversial. And it's like, but cruelty, you calling someone an animal abuser is much more controversial than you saying I'm against animal use. I don't understand how it isn't. But I think a lot of this problem is the content isn't being made for educational purposes. Content's being made for other vegans. Click, 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 click. If you call someone an animal abuser in a video, you know that you'll get loads of vegans telling you you're amazing. You won't educate anyone, but that don't matter if you're only interested in clicks, which sadly a lot of our movement is. One of
the biggest chants at events, isn't it, is often there's no excuse for animal abuse. That's a really common one, and it was chanted a lot at the march. And I was shouting use, but it gets drowned out by the and it blends in. No one really notices, but I did try.
Things like that are, as far as I'm concerned, anyway, the top of my list for next year. Like, we've got 12 months now to kind of really push some of these points home. That next year, let's make sure that chant is no excuse for animal use, because there's no reason not to be. You've pointed this stuff out. If anyone listened to you and clapped the things that you were saying, then in their minds, they should be thinking, yeah, we're minusing 2 letters. It's the same tune, the same rhythm, no difficulty, no problem. And it's a stronger message. Of course, we're going to make that little change because it's going to benefit what we're doing.
I think the trouble we have with wanting people to change is that if they're still in the environment with other activists who are still using that language, it's then, I think, is still absorbed into that, isn't it? It's people are still influenced heavily by that and fitting in. It's that urge to fit in as well, isn't it? That fitting in with what your environment and what's around you. So I guess it's going to maybe hopefully trickle. I don't know if it's going to be a dramatic change, but
I also think as well that people are kind of quite easily led to, so that if that becomes the predominant chant, everyone will join in with that anyway. They won't kind of sing abuse over the top of it. Like, it won't be the other way around to what you were dealing with. You won't get that. People will just chant what you're chanting. But it will be a learning curve. You're talking about some people that have been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years, and that's the chant they've always chanted. So why would they change it?
Yeah.
Well, there is a lesson to be drawn from the Dublin March, which I gave a talk at, but also it was organised by Wake, and they got everybody together in a park, and they gave everybody like a crib sheet with all the different chants. And I know that NARM did produce a chant. There's no excuse for animal use. They had it written, but what they did there was they actually kind of rehearsed it. They actually said, okay, let's go through a few chants. There's no excuse, and then they got everybody singing for animal use, and so that became what was used in the march, because that was the kind of dominant kind of, well, this is what the score is, kind of folks, kind of thing. So that might be possible. I'm not sure. I mean, obviously the London one is going to be much bigger than the Dublin one, but
yeah, it'd have been interesting, at the end of your speech, if you'd have gone, "We want comfier cages, don't we?" Whether everyone would have chanted with you or not, because I think you know what. It's not like they're just chanting for the sake of it. The fact that you got that round of applause when you said, others are not it. Everybody recognised what you were saying. It's just the fact that, as you say, they're going to go home, they're going to go on YouTube, or they're going to read something from someone else who's going to go, "Oh yeah, but it is this instead," and it goes against everything that you've said. That's the problem.
Yeah, but Wendy, say you ended your speech with, "There's no excuse." What do you think you'd have got back?
I'd have got abuse. Not have got abuse, but I'd have definitely got the word abuse. But I think some people say use, and others. There's a kind of.
I heard it. I mean, when I watched rewatched the show on Sunday, it might have even been you. There were a few people that when you heard the word abuse, you could hear the use like over the top. So there were people doing it, but they're just
like
that's probably me.
Yeah, I was going to say it may well have been you.
Really loud. No, I'm sure there were lots of people doing that.
Okay,
definitely.
so we're over an hour, so maybe we finish with because I agree strongly with Jeremy. I mean, I think that. Well, of the two words, cruelty and exploitation, obviously cruelty needs to just go. We can talk about exploitation. We might be able to put exploitation with something else. Ronnie suggests exploitation and oppression, that kind of thing. Or we could just think, well, exploitation is not so good either. I mean, I think we've talked about this in previous animal rights shows. Because it doesn't quite do it. Now, Andy's got an interesting take on this because, and even brings in the kind of an older meaning of the word cruelty, because I think when the vegan pioneers used to favor this word, exploitation, that was their dominant word, although other words was used, but this was their dominant word. And I think it was a bit stronger in those days, in the same way as, Andy, you were looking at the early writings and they were talking about like the cruelty of war. So even the word cruelty had a bit of a different meaning then.
Yeah. Literally, the quote that I bring up a few times is the cruelty of man upon other man. And you'd think if we were talking about, say, what was going on in Ukraine, we'd never say that. We'd never use that language now. Whereas back then, they're literally, I think that was written in 1947. So war's a big thing. And he's talking about the cruelty of man against another man. So the cruelty of humanity. But we would never say that now. That would seem such weak language. You'd never have the news going on and we've had another day of real bad cruelty in Ukraine. That would seem like it was kind of really underestimating what was going on and understating what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it would be a bit weird, wouldn't it? If you go, let's have a cruelty count in Ukraine. Yeah, that would be weird, wouldn't it? So yeah.
Well, a really good example you could look at, right? Take somewhere like Crufts in England that happens every year. You could get on the tannoy on the megaphone at Crufts and say, "Who here supports animal cruelty?" not a single hand, but every single person in that room is using their dog or using their animal and exploiting it, but they wouldn't recognize that. And they're all against cruelty, all of them. RSPCA have got to stand there. They're all against cruelty. Everyone in that room.
Yeah, and then if you switch it to who's against abuse, the same.
Yeah, exactly the same ones. Yeah.
Because these are their words, and it goes back to what you said. Why are we insisting on using their words when we've got our own words? It seems a bit weird in that sense. I mean, it's not as though there's a lack of words and we've got a kind of, we've got to have some kind of pitch fight over give it here, no, give it there, tug of war type. It's not like that. We've got our own words. Yeah.
And also we've got to remember that we're using cruelty under the umbrella of speciesism and where other animals have no rights recognized. Whereas in the human world, human rights are, obviously it's not the perfect situation, but human rights are recognized, whereas animal rights are not recognized. And so we're speaking of cruelty in a system where rights are recognized for humans, but not for animals. So we're trying to end cruelty in a system where they haven't even got any inherent rights recognized, full stop. So we need to push that agenda rather than just trying to stop cruelty, which I think we do more with human issues, is we're stopping cruel situations in lots of different groups, but the fundamental isn't even there for other animals.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So, yeah. Now, going back to the main thing, which is the speech, I think we're all agreed, Wendy, that you did really, really well, and we're really glad that we ended up having it on film, and we're glad that we can present it for posterity and all that kind of malarkey. And it will be interesting to see that other one as well that you were saying that Ronnie filmed. That's really good.
Yeah,
I think the more we get vegan takes on language out there, and of course we have talked about whether it's Animal Rights Show or Still Alive, and all that. Quite often we're broadcasting to people who already get it. It needs to go elsewhere. It'd be good to have strategies where we could try to get the fans of the influencers, say, just as an example, to watch this stuff, because it's going to make them go, oh, and not least the influencers themselves, because there has been some degree of change. We've spoken about that before, Andy, certainly with Joey, for example.
Well, actually, even in the article you just brought up, Roger, I forgot the woman's name now. Tarian?
Yeah.
Tarian, yeah.
She actually, there's a sentence there talking about rights violations, and I thought, oh, great, it's there, there. So it's in there.
It's right. The only time she talked about being an animal lover when she was talking about herself in the past.
In the beginning, yeah.
But what she did say, and that's what triggered my kind of hypothesis, such as it was the fact that she was there chowing down on some barbecue whilst being an animal lover, and there was no problem culturally or individually for her until suddenly she started going, hang on a minute. So it's a little bit, the kind of Paul McCartney thing. They're making leg of lamb and they're looking out at their Scottish farmyard window at lambs gambling in the field, and that wouldn't have been a problem until suddenly something else happens, and then they make the connection, right? But to actually kind of say you cannot be an animal lover and use them is culturally incoherent, and I think obviously our job is to challenge that you can be. But we've got to do that in a way that accepts, how kind of socialized that value is, how deeply socialized for many, many years. I mean, all of their lives. One of the first things we tell to children is don't be cruel, and don't do that, and so, they know it's their word. They know what it means. That it's theirs. They understand that word. And so we need to, even if you want to start with that, say we have a conversation with a speciesist, you start with that. You need to switch tracks pretty quick. But I think the conversation needs to be, all right, we're going to switch tracks now. Let's talk about the need for doing that, and then you can say, you're using words like abuse. I want to use words like use. Let's talk about that, and that's where the education starts. I think.
Yeah.
Right, people. Thank you for sticking with us. Thank you ever so much for the speech, Wendy, and also for joining us. It's a great honor to have you here, of course.
Oh, thanks for having me. And thank you, Andy, for suggesting me for the speech as well. I know you pushed to have me there, so I really appreciate that.
More than earned it, and then more than paid for it in terms of the speech. So anytime.
Thank you.
And if anyone from the home is listening, my vote is cast already, like on video. Like there's no argument.
We're coming up with another speech then.
There is a terrible thing though. I walked to the shop today to get a loaf of bread, and I was thinking for Wendy, being the last speaker on the keynote, it's kind of like the only way is down now, isn't it? So
don't. I'll tell you what, it keeps me grounded though. Just before I came on here, I was cleaning up fur balls, cat sick, cat poo, and feeding the cats and all that stuff. And it's just like, it keeps you grounded, doesn't it? It's like, it's great. That's what it's really about, isn't it?
Well, before I say anything else cruel or abusive to Wendy, I think we should finish. And so thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you again. Look out for Animal Rights Show announcements. I think we're struggling for the beginning of next month. I'm not sure though, but we've got something for the next month already lined up, haven't we, Wendy? So
yeah, we do. Well, hopefully, hopefully we're doing a show on Monday, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're gonna have to pull our fingers out if we're going to do that.
We are, aren't we? Wow. It's Friday tomorrow.
Yeah, Friday tomorrow. Yeah. Okay, people. Take care, everyone, and thanks again, and bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See you soon.